So I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm amazed that you're all out here. This is fabulous, and I've never been at a session where there's live translations. I cannot believe I'm speaking French. For me, this is so thrilling, and I want a copy of my slides because, this is great. My grandmother was French, and she'd be so proud. Well, not proud that I'm not speaking French, right? And I really am intrigued how they were going to interpret poop, but I guess that's the intestines bit, is that right? So, okay, without much ado, I shall continue. So here's a picture of Vancouver. This is my commute to work, and of course it never rains. It always looks like this. So here's my outline. Okay, I will talk to you with as many photographs from British Columbia as I can, because it's a beautiful place to live, as is Quebec. I just want to give you insights how, from my perspective, the MS Society of Canada funding has really put Canada at the forefront of MS research. I'm going to share with you some of my team's research work. Some of it is funded by the MS Society of Canada, and my team are based in Vancouver in British Columbia. So I'm going to show you some of our recent findings looking at the MS Prodrome, and I'll define what a prodrome is in a bit, and I will be talking about poop. So I get the ultimate pleasure. Am I too loud?
Let's try that.
I think I've got a droopy microphone.
It's going down? Okay, I won't make a joke on things going down.
Wave at me and I'll try and keep pulling it up. So I get to use the poop emoji in my presentations, which I find very exciting. And if there's time, only if there's time, I will just give you some insight into some other work that my group has published over the years, and just give you one-line summary findings of some of our research papers, and show you where we're going next. So this is a lovely campsite on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, if you ever fancy going. I really want to highlight here what a difference it makes to get funding from an organisation like the MS Society of Canada. So they funded me as one individual to come to Canada in 2001 as a postdoctoral fellow. And when you fund one researcher, I ended up staying here, I developed my own group. So this is my group. In Vancouver at the University of British Columbia, and these are smart, driven individuals who are devoting their careers to do research in multiple sclerosis. So I wanted to show you the face behind some of the research findings I'm going to show you. And actually, I'm really excited to say that 4 of these individuals now have faculty positions, and 3 of them are still in Canada, and now they have all developed their own research group, again focused on multiple sclerosis. So you get a real ripple effect when you fund one individual. And well, that's very kind of you, but I want to say I'm just one person. All of us do this in the research field. We all have a really strong team behind us. Okay, so for the money the MS Society has given me, all our researchers, we try and be very, very careful with that money and eke it out as much as possible. So for every $10 the MS Society has ever given me for research, I've leveraged that to bring in almost 100 additional research dollars. So I go out to bodies like... You're being very kind. I go out to bodies like the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the Public Health Agency of Canada. My group has also been well funded by the US National MS Society because we do work in Canada that they can't do in the US, and I'll share some of that with you in a moment. And then the UK MS Trust and others. So it's thanks to your help that we can do these kind of things. So back to my overview. I'm going to start talking about the prodrome. Is anyone thinking this? What is a prodrome? Has anyone never heard of a prodrome? No idea what I'm talking about. Okay, so let me try and define this. For a prodrome, I guess I'll give you the Oxford Dictionary definition. So a prodrome is an early symptom indicating the onset of a disease or illness. So I will give you an example of a known prodrome. So for example, I don't know if any of you get migraine with the aura, with the flashing lights. So I sometimes get that. So I find it quite a useful prodrome. When I see those flashing lights, I don't have a headache, I don't have a migraine, but when I see those flashing lights, I know I've got 2 hours to get to a dark room and lie down, and then I'm going to get a migraine. So for me, that's a very helpful prodrome. And obviously, it's a very short-lived prodrome, and then the headache starts. So that's one kind of prodrome. So in the context of multiple sclerosis, and I hope this makes sense, I am talking about the period before MS symptom onset. So I'm not just talking about before MS diagnosis, I'm talking about before MS symptom onset. Does that make sense? Because I want to ask you guys, though it's quite a big room, if any of you, now I've kind of defined what a prodrome is, if you look back at the time before your MS symptom onset, and that's typically perhaps a date that you and your neurologist perhaps have come to a consensus on, if that's the right way to put it, or where your neurologist has asked you a lot of questions about your history and decided this is when your MS probably started. If you think back before that time, the year before, 2 years before, 5 years before, in hindsight, can you see any things going on in that time that you attribute to your MS? And I suppose what I mean is, did you kind of think, well, I think I had MS then already. That was my MS. Or anyone, any thoughts? Anything there they could think about? Don't be shy. Oh yeah, of course. Do I have to listen to it in? Oh, how's this going to work? Oh, it's not. The room's too big, isn't it? Okay. So I think some of you have said yes, and you're nodding away. And I think the room is going to be too big for me to get comments back from people now, but maybe at the end. So it does sound like some of you are thinking about this. So this is exactly the question that we set out to look at. Our question was, is there a prodrome in multiple sclerosis? When we speak to people with MS, we could hear people saying, again, this is anecdote, that there was a prodrome, that they did think that there were things going on before MS symptom onset. Now, there's a lot of value into looking at this, and I shall highlight that when I show you our findings. But before we did this study, I was kind of intrigued as to what the medical field thought about it in multiple sclerosis. So I actually picked up a lead MS medical textbook that was valid through until 2000, just to see what it would say. Would they think back in 2000 an MS prodrome existed or not? So multiple choice question to you, bad luck. What do you think the lead multiple sclerosis medical textbook said? And this is the second edition of a book called McAlpine's MS. Do you think they said, yep, a prodrome exists? B, maybe, but we need more evidence? Or C, no?
I'd say B.
We got some B's? Got some C's? Got some A's? I was actually amazed that the book mentioned the word prodrome, but no, they said no, doesn't exist. So it showed me, or it reminded me, or it highlighted to me why it was so hard for us to get funding to do this study, because quite some of the reviewers just said, you won't find anything, so why are you looking? But anyway, we got funding from the US National MS Society. So given that we're in this place where some people don't even think it exists, I have a question to you, because this is what we had to really think about in research. How would you go and measure the MS prodrome in a really, really convincing way that you're going to convince the medical profession, you're going to convince people that it exists? Anyone, any thoughts? So this is my analogy. It's like kind of everyone thinks the world is flat and you've got to show that it's not. So this is how we did it. And you heard some presentations this morning talking about access to data and information. So in Canada, it's a really fabulous place to do research. You can access, as researchers, you can access health information, and we could access this in the period before people develop multiple sclerosis. So what we can do in Canada, each person has their own health number, and we can access, it's in an anonymized form, every prescription that each individual ever filled, every hospital visit, every physician visit. And my take home from this slide is that health data in Canada is amazing. It's awesome. It takes 1.5 to 2 years to get access to this information, because you have to go through a very rigorous process, and there's a lot of privacy and confidentiality pieces that have to be put in place, and quite rightly so. But when you do get access to this information, and all your questions have been approved by the relevant ministries of health for you to ask them using this data, it is an amazing source. So for this prodromal study, when we were looking at the MS prodrome, we linked information together from 4 provinces across Canada. So what do we find? And of course, I want to ask you guys, what do you think we found? So we looked at the 5 years leading up to MS symptom onset, and we compared these people to individuals in the general population who were not known to have MS, who were similar for age and sex and where they lived. So what do you think we found? So we're looking at people accessing the health system, and we could measure why they were accessing the health system. And we found in those 5 years, people were more likely to access the health system, people who are developing multiple sclerosis. For what reasons? What do you think we found? Depression. Pain. Clumsiness. Falls. So we can pick up things like falls, falling over. Memory problems, a bit more difficult to get with this kind of information. Bit more challenging for us to do that. Not to say that it's not there, but okay. I'll put you vision problems. Vision problems. Fatigue, yes. Oh, I like the movements going on here. Yeah, thank you, fatigue. Okay, so we found that in that 5 years leading up to MS symptom onset, people were more likely to have bladder-related issues. So they were visiting the physician for bladder-related issues. And this is a real sign on a toilet in Cortes Island, one of the Gulf Islands in British Columbia, and it really made me laugh because that really described how I felt at that moment in time. People who were developing multiple sclerosis were more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression, so you were correct. There were 50% more visits to a psychiatrist, and this is all in the 5 years leading up to MS symptom onset. So these people are not supposed to have MS, but we can measure it even at the level of health system access. People in that 5 years leading up to MS symptom onset were also more likely to access the health system for things like pain. You are correct, fibromyalgia, headaches and migraine, irritable bowel syndrome, sleep disturbances, and this was an odd one we weren't expecting, more visits to a dermatologist, so for skin-related issues. Okay, so suicide, no, it's too, you said suicide, it's too rare. It's too rare to be able to measure. So we didn't, and I'm guessing you're obviously talking about suicide that's not completed, because if someone completed suicide, I'm afraid they wouldn't be in our study. If they did that before MS symptom onset, I'd have to be a clairvoyant. So we can't get attempted suicides in our study, no. So what? Why do we care? Why do we care? We found here that we can measure the MS prodrome, and it is measurable as a higher healthcare use 5 years before clinical recognition of MS, pain, irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety and depression. So why is it important? Well, first up, it does tell us that MS has started earlier than we perhaps previously thought, and it's manifesting with, presenting with symptoms that you can measure even at the level of the health service. So that's very powerful for us as researchers, and it suggests to us that maybe there's a window of opportunity that we can identify people with MS earlier, maybe save some frustration that people go through while they're trying to get a diagnosis for their condition. Maybe in the future it might allow us to then manage MS earlier. So if you had a fabulous treatment that would absolutely halt MS in its steps, you could potentially use these kind of findings to try and identify people as early as possible to then treat them with your fabulous intervention. And also, secondly, if you want to know what causes multiple sclerosis, these findings have been really, really insightful to tell us that we need to be really careful. When we want to know what causes MS, we have to think about the prodrome, because it's no good us, say, looking in the 5 years before MS symptom onset and thinking that something we're measuring in that time period might trigger MS. I would argue that you have to think MS has probably started then already. You're not looking at a trigger of MS or a risk factor for MS. That person probably already has MS. So does that make sense? So moving forwards, we're really thinking carefully about what these findings mean and trying to think about how we can maybe implement them in clinical practice at some point. And I just want to highlight the first authors on those studies I've been showing you, Jose and Tanya here, and they both now have moved on from my group and have got great careers as new investigators. So just showing you that it's really young, smart, intelligent people that are driving these studies. So back to my outline. I get to talk about poop. So one of my favorite topics at the moment. What has poop got to do with multiple sclerosis? So I'm actually going to be showing you some findings, very small study looking at the gut microbiome in children with multiple sclerosis. But before I get there, I'll give you a brief overview of the gut microbiome and the microbiome in general. Who has never heard of the gut microbiome? Is this completely news to anyone that you have trillions of microbes that live in and on you. So your microbiome are all of the microbes, so that's bacteria, archaea, fungi, viruses that live on you, on your skin, and in you, in your gut and other places. So you do have trillions of friendly microbes that do really cool things for you. If you like counting cells, and I hate to break it to you, but you're actually only half human. So half of your cells are human, and the other half are microbes. So bacteria and fungi and viruses. Isn't that cool? You'll never think about yourself in the same way ever again. So about 90% of your microbes sit in your gut, and they are doing so many cool things for you. I shall share with you just some brief stories to show you how interesting the gut microbiome is. So why am I showing you a picture of sushi? Well, when they sequenced or looked at the microbes in the guts of people in Japan, they were a bit confused that they found these bacteria or the genes in these bacteria that seemed to have come from the ocean, that seemed to have come from the sea. So what were they doing in the guts of people in Japan? And what they realized is these microbes, the Japanese had somehow acquired them from the ocean, and it helped them to break down seaweed so that they could digest their diet more efficiently. And when they sequenced the bacteria in the guts of people in North America, we're much less likely to have this microbe. So isn't that cool? You can acquire microbes from different places, and they'll do really cool things for you. Why am I showing you a picture of a baby elephant? Who's heard of copophrasia? I want to know if how the translators translated that. Copophrasia. Anyone heard of that? Do you know what it means? I can hear eating, so someone's getting it. To eat feces. Don't try this at home. So this is really interesting and cool. So baby elephants will eat the feces of the herd, and it enables them to acquire the microbes in their gut that they need to digest the diet of the herd. So isn't that interesting? As humans, we acquire our microbes in different ways, and I don't suggest you go home and try that at home. But it's fascinating to think about what an impact that can have. Okay, so what else do we know about the gut microbiome? It's only recently been recognized that greater than 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. We had a little bit about serotonin this morning and its relationship to depression. Previously, it was mainly thought to be just in the brain. 90% of it is produced in your gut. Your gut microbiome is also really important in terms of vitamin production. Some vitamins you're not very good at making, you can't make yourself, and it's difficult to get from your diet, and your gut can produce, say, vitamin K. And your gut, and this is really important, regulates the immune system. So your gut microbiome is constantly talking to your immune system and vice versa. And we know that the immune system is very important in multiple sclerosis. So there are many reasons why we are interested in the gut microbiome in MS. And all of you know, right, that there is this gut-brain connection. Have you ever felt where something good or bad has just happened and you feel it right in your stomach first? That's your gut-brain connection. Sometimes your stomach can feel it before your brain can register what's happening. So we know that there's a nerve that goes directly from your gut to your brain. It's called the vagus nerve. But there are many other ways that your gut communicates with your brain. So whether it's through your immune system and other products that the gut microbiome makes from your diet. So, okay, why were we looking at the gut microbiome in children with multiple sclerosis? So fortunately, MS in children is very rare. We think that less than 5% of all MS patients will present in childhood, will have symptoms in childhood. But from the research perspective, at least, it's a very unique opportunity to look at possible causes of MS and what might drive things like relapses in MS, because these children have done fewer things than adults. And by that I mean, think of if you have a typical adult in front of you and they might be in their 30s, maybe 40s when they're diagnosed with MS, and you say to them, okay, so what did you do for the last 30 years? And can you tell me what you ate 10 years ago? And how was your exercise 20 years ago? And I can't remember what I ate yesterday for lunch. So it's very, very challenging in a typical adult to do that. Now, it's not to say it's easy in children, but they haven't lived as long, and it can be a little bit easier getting information. Often the parents will know, when they were vaccinated, how long they were breastfed for, and things like that. So it can be a little bit more straightforward. Oh, I'm getting the 10 minutes. I shall shift. So it is very rare, and I was fortunate enough to go down to San Francisco and work with the Pediatric MS Network with Dr. Emmanuel Wildbunt, who is a neurologist down there. And she let me go look at their gut microbiome samples. Now, this was a very small study, and our first question was, does the gut microbiota composition, so this is stool, we're getting poop from these children, does it differ between children with and without multiple sclerosis? So this was a very basic question because we didn't know the answer to this at the time. The children with MS, did they look different from the children without MS in terms of their gut microbiome? So multiple choice, what do you think? Yes? We got a yes, no? No idea? You're going, why would you be standing here talking if you hadn't found something? How about this, yes or no? I'm being really mean. Okay, that was the answer. There are many ways you can measure the gut microbiome. So what we found is that the gut microbiome of children with MS was largely similar to children without MS. When you look at the big picture, so this is excuse me for this analogy, but if you think of your gut microbiome as this flourishing garden, so all your microbes are doing wonderful things for you, we did not find that the kids without MS looked like this beautiful garden and the children without MS looked terrible. There was, no microbes. It did not look like that. Kind of looked more like this. They both looked reasonably similar. They both had good gut diversity. But when we looked up close, and this again is my plant analogy, when we looked under the bushes and we really looked up close, it's as if we could find more weeds in the gut microbiomes of the kids with multiple sclerosis. So we could see differences between kids with and kids without MS in terms of the individual groups of microbes that were living in there. So the study was very small, 38 children, so it's very preliminary findings. So I won't say any more in the context of that particular study, but the MS Society now has funded us for a much larger study. We've just finishing up sequencing stool samples from 300 children with and without multiple sclerosis, and these are children who've been enrolled from across Canada and also all the way across the US as well, using the US Pediatric Network. So I'm afraid I don't have results from that study here, but maybe next time I can share them with you. So how long have I got? I could actually start wrapping up now. 7 minutes. Okay, I will wrap up now. Forgive me for not sharing them with you some of our other findings. I don't know if you have a copy of my presentation, but I will move on then so that there's time for questions. So I did want to share this with you because I thought this was quite fun, in case you wanted to know. So for the gut microbiome study that I just showed you, we are getting people to mail their poop to us. Yes, you can do this. So you have to put it, you have a little vial. It's about, in case you wondered, in case you ever get asked to do this. Actually, there are many ways you can collect and analyze the gut microbiome, and this is the process we use. The kids get a little vial, so we don't need much stool, much poop, and they package it up, put it on ice, and pop it into Canada Post box. So, where are we shipping our shit to? We're not sending our microbiome to Montreal. Are we sending it to Quebec City? No, Quebec's too nice. Are we sending it there? Are we sending it to Toronto? Should we send our poop to Toronto? Winnipeg, or you don't care? You want to ship our poop to Winnipeg? You're right, actually. We're sending it to the frozen wasteland in the middle of Canada. We're working with a national microbiology lab there, so they've been looking and sequencing our samples. Okay, so I will finish up there. So forgive me for not showing our other findings with you. I'll just briefly say that we've got a lot of interesting work going on. The MS Society is funding our gut microbiome study that I just briefly mentioned. Now we've got 300 samples we're sequencing. We've got a 7-year study from CIHR, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, looking at long-term effects of the disease-modifying drugs for MS, and I'm hoping we can use artificial intelligence. We're not there yet. I know there was a question earlier. We are talking with our colleagues in AI to see if we can apply that to our looking at the drug safety and effectiveness question. But we're not able to apply that yet to our data, but I would love to do that. So we are trying to look into that. Okay, so I would like to say thank you very much to my team and my funders, and thank you for your attention. So I'll leave you with some pictures of British Columbia. Happy to take questions.